His name is Mike Babcock, and he's going to be interviewed by Katie, and so we get two for the price of one. So let's give them a warm welcome. Okay, you can start now.
And Katie's going to say a few words before we get started. And she fill in what she's doing there.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks, Bea, for setting up another wonderful Member Connections. We're going to start us off. Away. And we're going to start off with having the illustrious Mike Babcock introduce himself and take it away.
Thanks. What I plan to do is give you a quick thumbnail sketch of what I've done most of my life. And then when that's done, many of you know that details there. I want to tell you a story about an event that changed my life, literally, and changed certainly the way I view the world. So first, my bio, I was raised in Pasadena, went to school here. 4 days after I graduated from college, I got married, and shortly after that, I joined the Navy because I didn't want to get enlisted. I had probably the cushiest job the Navy has to offer.
Excuse me, Mike, could the mic be put closer? It's hard to hear.
I'm sorry. Well, I don't know whether we're using this mic or that mic.
Let me stop it just 1 minute.
You're loud and clear, Katie, but Mike is not as clear.
Okay, how's this?
Can you hear now?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, wave if you can hear.
It's better, Mike. Thank you.
Okay. I just joined the Navy with the cushiest job you could get. I was an air intelligence officer, the briefing pilots on what the Russian ships and planes look like. I lived at home, virtually a civilian, and I distinguished myself by never going on board a ship. I don't think I set foot on a Navy ship or anything that was afloat. And when I got out of the Navy, I started my career as a math teacher. I taught math for actually the next probably 40 years in one form or another. And as I was teaching math, I was teaching math at Poly in the upper school. Administrative duties crept in, and for about 15 or 16 years, I was high school principal. I was teaching at the same time. It's a great job, it's the best job I ever had. And then more administrative duties came in. I became head of the school in 1980, and I did that until I retired when I was 65, and it was 1998, 96, I can't remember. Anyway, after I retired, my interests shifted to public schools almost entirely. I substitute taught at Blair for a year and got involved in all kinds of public school stuff. I was on the school board for 8 years and involved in all kinds of public school issues that I'm no longer involved with. After my tour of duty on the school board ended, I was sitting on the sidelines as a cheerleader mainly, about all I ever did. I'm still on the board of 2 charter schools. One you probably know of, Learning Works here in Pasadena, and the other is a charter school for all girls in Los Angeles. And while I'm on the board and I do stuff and I talk up public school education, I'm actually contributing virtually nothing these days. But I'm a happy camper and I've got the village to keep me amused. Anyway, here's the story I want to tell you that literally changed my life. It happened in the mid 80s. The Cold War was still raging. Russia was the evil empire, thanks to that man Reagan. I had not thought about Russia in any other way than the evil empire. I never visited, I never thought about going until a friend called me up and said that she was helping to organize a peace walk in Moscow, and did I want to come along? Well, as strange as it sounded, I said, sure, that sounds interesting. I didn't know I could get, I was still fully employed at Poly. Didn't know I could get permission to go from my board president, but he said, sure. So off I went to Moscow without having the slightest idea of what I was getting into. I didn't know a word of Russian. It was just, gosh, this sounds like fun, I'll go. And it proved to be a miraculous time. We marched in the streets of Moscow with Russians coming out of their apartments to join us. It was a very merry time. We sang, bands joined us. It was phenomenal. And of course, I was singing, but had my eyes wide open. I couldn't believe these were such friendly people. Every time we came to a statue or a monument of some kind, we'd stop and we'd sing America the Beautiful, and then some Russian equivalent song. Of course, I couldn't understand a word of it, but everybody was singing. American was carrying the Russian flag, Soviet flag in those days, and a Russian was carrying the American flag. So it had a wonderful, wonderful spirit to it. I could give many details of what happened to us in that when we were marching around. But the event that happened that had such a profound effect on me happened early in my stay there. A couple of days after we'd landed, we were all billeted in the same hotel. I didn't have any idea where we were. But I decided to go for a jog one morning. And so I just put on my running shoes and in all innocence, I just started jogging. I figured somebody would tell me if I was doing something wrong. So I jogged along and without knowing where I was going, trying to keep track so I could make my way back to the hotel, I realized I was standing in the middle of a red square. I was like, whoa, red square. And there was the Kremlin. And so I stopped and looked around, and then I realized I had more bombs and missiles aimed at the top of my head than any place I could be in the world. And then I looked at all the people who were going about their daily business on Red Square, and they looked like normal people to me. And it occurred to me, why would you want to kill all these people? As I was pondering that, a man came up to me and stopped. Obviously, I wasn't a Russian going to work. I was some crazy American out jogging. And he paused right in front of me. I tear up when I tell this part. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and our eyes met it sounds crazy, but in a miraculous way. We just looked at each other. And then after a few moments, he held out his hand and shook my hand. And as he was shaking my hand, we looked at each other. And at that moment, I realized, or it became so clear to me, that there's nothing, he was telling me that there was nothing he would ever do to hurt me. And I was telling him there's nothing I would ever do to hurt him. And that kind of morphed in my brain into a metaphor for our entire populations. He was speaking for the Russian people of the government. And I was speaking for the American people. And it kind of, it seared into my soul, such a profound feeling. And then, of course, moving on from that, the whole absurdity of war became much more clear to me, and how absurd it was to be making all these missiles and continuing to develop nuclear arms when there were all these people just going about their business. They looked perfectly satisfied with their lives. And then it occurred, and it knew, but it made clear to me that the wars are started by governments, by heads of governments, not by the people I saw walking in Red Square or the people I see walking in Pasadena or none of us villagers. We have no interest in starting a war. We have no interest in killing people. And further, again, what is obvious to everybody, but it became more clear to me, it's the heads of government that start wars. The armies we see in uniform, those people didn't make a decision to go to war. They're just following orders. And the people who made the decision to go to war never risked their lives or their well-being. They continued to be safe, well-fed. They never sit in a foxhole. So since then, I have been so focused on how we are misfocused in America and most other countries, in how we conduct ourselves and how we defend ourselves. This is going to go on longer than I want, but anyway, we ought to have a Department of Peace, not a Department of Defense, and we ought to spend our money resolving issues peacefully instead of wars. Think of all the missiles. Okay, we go on here. We've got hundreds of missiles in this country aimed at, I presume they're still aimed at Moscow and other Russian cities. It's certainly aimed at North Korea. Excuse me a minute. And we continue. Sorry, there. We continue this foolish mission. So that's where I continue to be concerned and look and think. And happily enough, for me, I'm no longer threatened. I got the village to support me, and my personal life is just fine. But the frustration I feel, I continue to, it grows stronger, and I'm sure it's shared by many of you. I know it is because we've had discussions on this subject. But anyway, that's my story, and I think I did do in a reasonable amount of time, so that I'd love to have some questions about what I've done or anything that you think occurs to you that you might want more elaboration on.
All right, let's take a minute to take any questions about that chapter in his life, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the village and the formation of that afterwards. So
Sure.
Feel free to unmute and ask any questions or comments.
I have a question. Mike, when you said as soon as you retired from Poly, you switched your interest to public schools.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we were in public schools, but why did you do that?
Well, it was clear to me that that's where the issues were, and that's what needed help.
Yeah.
I had a dream about that time that I was tending a garden. I still remember the dream as clear as ever. I was tending a garden, I had plenty of water, fertilizer, things were growing nicely. And I looked across the street and there was just barren land. And that was the metaphor that drove me into public education.
Huh.
And I'm very glad I did, because I learned so much getting involved with public school people and public school issues. I wasn't very successful as a school board member. It's a hard ship to turn for so many things that get in the way. But my interest certainly, and they've remained there. You know, I have very little connection with Poly anymore, and they're doing just fine, and they'll continue to do just fine. But our public school kids are not.
I have a question. How long were you in Russia? And what, after this confrontation with, and then the handshaking, and you said you had guns and missiles, how did you exit that little situation?
How did I want?
How'd you exit?
Well, I jogged back to the hotel. Miraculously, I found it. The events went on. I had nothing to do with anything that happened. I just followed the crowd. It was great fun. We went everywhere. Went to a church. Went to a mosque. Again, surprisingly, those things existed because in those days we were told that the Russians were all beleaguered people, huddled in overcoats going into smelly factories. It was absurd. But you think about it, that's the media we all read or heard. The Russians were bad people.
Do you know who sponsored the trip, Mike?
You know, it has a name, but I can't remember who it is. There's an American who I know the name of, and I met the guy, but I never carried on. And who the Russian counterpart was, I never found out. They were there and joined in the march, of course, but I never knew them.
Mike, how long?
Mike, did the word perestroika come up at all
how
at
long
that
was
point?
it- How long was this before Russia broke, or the Soviet?
Oh, well,
Union broke?
it was 1986, I think, and the things were starting to thaw because we were entertained by government-sponsored activities that were a good deal of BS, but it was an effort on their part to at least speak the words of friendship, and certainly for the Russian people. My God, it was clear. But I don't know, when did the Berlin Wall come down? Early 90s?
91?
91.
Yeah,
Oh, was perestroika ever mentioned, that term?
yeah. And Gorbachev had just come into power there.
Yeah.
And he was a peaceful, loving guy. Still is, probably.
So Dave is asking if perestroika came up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you weren't even born.
I was little.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. So now let's hear about a new chapter in your life. How
Yeah,
you
that
got
was-
involved in the village. We have some members here who have joined in the last year or even the last few years, and they might not have no idea about the story.
Well, many of you were there when it happened. Certainly Nancy was, because it happened in her living room. It's a wonderful story. I'm just sure I'll make it quick because many of you know it. But we, Clark Oler, who was a priest at All Saints, he has since passed away. He had to move from one apartment to another, and about 4 or 5 of his friends decided to help him do that. And so that started the 4 or 5 of us who didn't all know each other, helping Clark. And we started talking about, well, what are we going to do when we get to be Clark's age and we need help? And Nancy's husband, Jim, was instrumental in keeping that conversation going. And we explored all kinds of things, cooperative living, and looked at places where we all might move. That was never going to fly, but we played around with it. Wives, of course, were not at all not at all happy about the idea of living with a whole bunch of other people. So anyway, very, very coincidentally, at the same time we were doing this, a couple of board members of ECS, it was called something else, Episcopal Services, visited the original village, Beacon Hill, not Belmont Hill, in Boston, and they came back and talked to us. They were members of the board of something called the
Sophie Miller.
Sophie Miller, thank you, Sue. Sophie Miller Foundation, and they took an interest in us. And another very coincidental but wonderful thing that happened to us was we corralled Sue Kajawa to be our first interim. No, you weren't even interim. You were our executive director, weren't you?
I was a volunteer.
Yes, she was she says proudly. Yes, she was indeed a volunteer for about 6 months. And we started attending conferences, as one in San Francisco. And other people then became interested and joined in and kind of picked up the cause. We had from the very beginning, and I think this accounts for part of the success of the village. It's been a very egalitarian organization. We do have an organizational chart, but it's a level playing field, and nobody has any greater right to speak or express opinions than anybody else, which I think is unique. There's always somebody, and in business, of course, you got a CEO, and then you've got financial people, et cetera. And we certainly do have officers and a treasurer and a president or vice president, we should have. But their voice, I won't say carries no more weight, that's not quite right, but they have equal rights to speak as any other member, particularly those of you that just joined. I hope you'll feel that we need your opinions. And though you may get over-talked in some of our discussions, I hope that you will pitch in your thoughts and ideas, because we are a growing organization. We have to be a growing organization if we're going to continue to exist. And the evolution of younger people coming in, absolutely vital. And I think our mission will not change. I think it will continue to serve the needs of elderly who have no better choice. It's either that or go to a retirement facility. And even those that go to retirement facilities, I think will find a lot of use in village activities. We already have some who are at either Little Gardens or Mount Cetro, or other retirement communities. So some people, some of us as we get older, will need the kind of full-time care that only a retirement facility can offer. Others, like myself, and many of you, can stumble along and get fed, have our needs essentially taken care of, or have someone come live in the house like I do. But I think the village is, what keeps me interested in the village is that the village will continue to serve people, some of whom we, of course, haven't met, some have just joined us. But the other thing that's happened, and you all are involved in this, is anyone who has an idea to start something does. And we've got, I don't know how many affinity groups that have started because someone says, hey, I'd like to talk about fill in the blank, Civil War, anything else. And that starts a group. We just send out a note. Anyone want to talk about Civil War? Well, yeah, I do. So that kind of life and originality, I think, is absolutely vital to our welfare.
Wonderful.
Oh, well, I got to include my friend Katie here. We were fortunate getting Sue. She volunteered for 6 to 8 months. Then we put her on the payroll. And then the day came when I knew would happen. And she said, enough of this. I mean, she retired from a full-time, very successful career at Mother's Club. And the last thing she wanted was a job, for God's sakes. But she became interested, and now she's the treasurer of the organization. No,
Vice president.
excuse me, she's vice president. Well, there's no hierarchy, so
No hierarchy, but it's vice president.
she is vice president, and she'll remind you if you forget. Anyway, that's what keeps us going.
But
Katie, thank you. That's what I started on Katie. After Sue retired, Peggy Buchanan became our executive director, and she filled that role for maybe 5 or 6 years, did a fine job. She decided to move to Ashland, Oregon, and then we put out a search for an executive director, and I had not done searches like this. But the website and the internet connections that everybody has with everything, all we did was we posted the job opening with a job description, of course, and Katie found it. How'd you find it?
Through Wired Women, through Monica Hubbard.
Monica Hubbard.
Wired Women, there you go. So we got a Wired woman here, as our executive director, and we're very fortunate in that regard. Katie, as you know, has just done a terrific job, both in raising money, inviting and enlisting new members, and helping our affinity groups continue to thrive. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Mike. I remember it was almost exactly 1 year ago. You and I sat in this room and you said, okay, now I want to ask you the questions you can't ask in an interview. And I got really nervous. But you asked about my family and my kids and what it was like. And you shared about Carol and some of your career. And that was just wonderful. But this is even better. You get to be here.
Yes, exactly.
Turn up the spotlight.
Well, I think interest in other people is also one of our characteristics. I don't want to ramble on too long because I could. But we see each other as people now. When we had jobs, we had somebody to report to, we had someone who had some authority, someone who signed our checks. And now it's just us. I love that.
And it's so great.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. You don't have a pair lesson plan.
Yeah.
I don't have to answer to
You never
anybody.
saw a lesson plan, did you? Not of mine. Tell us, Mike, about your trips, what you did for fun, your camping trips.
Oh my
and your-
gosh, we had a camper since our kids were young. We had it maybe for 35 or 40 years, different campers, and we'd go all over the country. When I had the summers, I had time during the summer, we'd always go back to Indiana where Carol's parents lived, and then visited national parks with our kids all the time. It was a wonderful way to travel, particularly with 4 kids. You know, you stuff them in a car and stop at a restaurant and they order stuff they don't eat. It used to drive me crazy. So now when you stop with a camper, you say, you know, you want some food, there it is. You don't have to wait for your food. Well, as quickly as Carol can make it. Anyway, it was a great way to live. I could live all year round in a camper.
So for those who don't know, share about your family, Mike.
Well, I have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. I was with our daughter in Colorado Springs over Thanksgiving. She has a partner. My daughter has 3 kids. 2 girls live in Denver, and her son lives here in Pasadena, or they're hereabouts, and he's a school teacher, or he's now an adjunct professor at some university I can't remember the name of. But he moved out about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. And I got a replacement person who's wonderful. And, she changes the light bulbs and does other chores for me.
And then your boys?
And my 3 boys all live close at hand. They're all over at my house. They were Sunday. The Ram game bring us together. And
Who's the clown?
who's the clown?
Don't you have a clown?
Oh, one of my son's daughters was a professional clown. But she now has a full-time job for making after-school programs for public school kids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a great
She's
job. And
Right up her alley then.
she's
Yeah.
terrific at it. Yeah,
She's terrific.
my
Susan, you know her?
She's the one that Mike introduced me to at one of our meetings, and she had heard from Mike about my experience in camp. And that's how she said to me,
Oh.
if I find a writer, would you be willing to tell your story? And that was created into that play that everybody got to see that time.
Oh, wow.
That's how I got
she-
Wow.
my oldest son has retired, and his wife, they were both working up until about 3 months ago. And we have a place in Oregon, just west of Eugene on a lake. And Michael, my son, and his wife, also named Linda, they're up there a lot. And so they help take care of that place. It's lovely. And all my kids and grandkids, and got 2 great grandkids. They're all up there when they can get there.
What does it feel like to have a son who's retired?
Can't imagine. I really can't imagine. But it's lovely having them around. They're all very solicitous of me, and they take care of me. They call me up, see if I'm still alive. And I plan to stay alive because I want to see my great grandkids turn into young ladies. It'll be a while, but anyway, we're a very close-knit family, and with me now dependent on their help, it's helped bring us closer together.
Ike, what do you think is your highest hobby as you grow older? I know think it's changed, but what do you think has evolved to as one of your best hobbies?
Your hobbies.
Oh, yeah, well, I did a lot of woodworking when I was able to do that sort of thing. I made a lot of tables, chairs, most of the furniture, except for the beds. In Oregon, I made most of the furniture for the house, which I really enjoyed. And it was like I always needed a project. I always had some woodworking project going until I'm no longer able to do that. Which is disappointing.
And now as you're older, she's usually asking, what's your favorite hobby now?
The village.
Well, ping pong and puzzles, I thought.
Well, ping pong, puzzles. I have a dear friend who's works jigsaw puzzles with me, so I go over to her house about 4 or 5 times a week.
Oh, wow.
It's really, really nice. Neither of us are very good, but we're about to finish, and we get such pleasure when we put the pieces together.
Yes.
Priscilla?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, you also play bridge.
Oh, yeah. I play bridge 3 or 4 times a
Do you
week.
still play bridge?
Yep. Just got through a game today. Well, Jeff was there.
Oh. Where do you play in person now?
No, we'll play on Zoom.
Are you gonna start playing in person?
I hope not. Well, because it goes so much quicker.
Oh, not as much chatting, maybe, or?
Well, you can chat all you like, but the cards get dealt. The tricks, when they're made, they get picked up. The score is kept automatically. So there's plenty of chatter,
Oh, I see.
but there's no time spent.
Online bridge, not.
Yeah.
Well, do you play with the same 3 people?
No,
Each time you get on, you have another.
two groups. There's a village group that, sorry. Oh dear. There's a village group that Jeff is in. No, I'm sorry, Peter Lesord engineers. And then Jeff and I are in another group that has people over on the west side in it. And then there's another group that's totally divorced from anything the village has to do. But that also keeps me amused.
I guess that's better because you don't have to drive anywhere.
You don't have to drive anywhere and you get twice as much game in. 'Cause you're not taking time. You know, shuffling cards.
Yeah.
Should go over. So that's what my hobbies are right now. So,
That's wonderful. Any other questions for Mike?
Mike, did you know you have something in common with Peter Lesord? He was in the Navy and he was never on a ship either.
yeah, he probably doing the real work. We were in about the same time,
Oh, okay.
but I forget.
I was on the good ship Pentagon.
Pentagon.
Oh, yeah, you actually performed duties.
No, he was in the Pentagon.
Oh, wow.
Mike, I didn't hear the beginning. You were born in California or back east?
No, I was born in New Jersey, but my father moved his family here, my family here when I was 5.
Okay, so it's mostly California.
As far as I know, Pasadena is my home, and I've lived here. I had a couple of, of course, the Navy, and then I had a couple of times I was in schools, one in Santa Barbara and one in La Jolla.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, do you still go up to Santa Barbara?
No,
No.
Mike, did you go to private schools for high school?
yes, I did. I went to a boys' boarding school, which I don't recommend to anybody.
Why do you think your parents sent you to boarding school?
Well, my brother went to a boarding school. It wasn't because they didn't love me. My parents were very supportive and loved me no matter what happened. But it's what people were
Yeah.
doing in those days, you know? It was the 1950. Boarding schools were thriving. And I did get a good education. I don't discount that. But it's not a healthy climate. Particularly as it relates to girls.
You did all
How did you meet your wife, or was that?
Carol saved my life because she was a girl I could actually talk to.
She's asking how you met her.
Yeah, well, I met her when she was 16 and I was 18.
Where?
Here in Pasadena. She was a roommate of a girl that I knew here in Pasadena.
Oh,
So I never, I never was comfortable talking to women actually until maybe I was in my 30s.
Hmm.
It's literally true. And I don't know, I guess it just changed when I got to know women. Just in the workplace or somewhere, certainly wasn't the Navy. And you develop all kinds of myths about women in a boys' boarding school.
Ah,
I mean, the information about sex all comes from the locker room through jokes and other maligning kinds of comments about girls. So, you know, it's just not healthy.
wonder if
But
it's
I'm
the
over it now. I love women.
same.
But then you ended up working in a job that was primarily female colleagues, teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
I never noticed that you didn't like to talk to women.
Oh, yeah. Well, I talk to women, obviously,
Yeah,
but I was never really comfortable. And the memoir group
yeah.
is another example that's helped me get very comfortable with listening to and talking to women. I love women. So my best friends are women.
But I think that's interesting. I don't know if they can hear that you, in your 80s, in the memoir group,
Yeah,
you were still getting more comfortable
Yep.
talking to women.
yeah.
But doesn't it just goes on and
On
on.
and on and on.
Just
Well,
goes on and on.
it takes time. You gotta understand, I grew up with so many myths.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I never questioned them. My mother and father's relationship was very male dominated, although he was a wonderful, loving man, loved my mother. The assumptions that were just part of our culture back then did not work to my advantage or anybody else's. And I dated Carol. She went to school in New York City, Princeton, so she was down. Well, every time I had an excuse to ask her to come down, she did. So I really never had another date, except Carol.
Oh,
She, on the other hand,
I know how the women's group started in the village, but how did the men's group start in the village?
well, Dave Foltz was instrumental in that.
Dave?
Dave? You want to say something about how the men's group started?
Tell us.
Oh, he's probably muted.
No, he's muted.
Yeah, the men's group, well, I don't think I was instrumental and I don't recall who was, frankly, but it started in my place. And so we had a small group in my living room and that worked for a month or two. And then it started growing.
So what did you call them? You call those new people to your house to let's get together, or how'd you do it?
Yeah, we set a date and got together just as we do now, once a month. But as time passed, we could finally, I think I borrowed chairs, Mike's chairs. You remember your had extra chairs, Mike? And so I brought theirs in, but it turns out we had people sitting on the stairs, climbing the stairs.
Oh my gosh.
And so it got too big. The point was it was too big. And so we moved to where, Mike? Do you recall? Where do you go next?
Yeah, when we moved, by the time we had to move, we had this place.
You were in here. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Which
Yeah.
was really nice.
Well, anyway, it was delightful having this crowd of people once a month.
Well, I hear it's one of the best groups in town.
We like to think so. While Zoom allows many people to come to the meeting who otherwise would have a hard time getting here, it also prevents us from looking at people, looking into the eyes of people. So I much preferred it when we were in this room. We could all see each other. And one of our protocols, which I particularly like, is only one person speaks at a time. We have a topic and then we all have a chance to pitch in our thoughts, but we don't have crosstalk until everyone's had a chance to speak.
Well, see, the men's group is one big group, while the women's have a lot of little adjunct little groups. So the unique thing is you just stayed all the men, though we don't have. Well, how many men are in there?
Yeah.
All the men of the village, right?
All the men are invited. I think it's about 30 people. Does that seem right? How many people come to men's
Well,
time?
men's time, the number has declined. I think we have about a dozen, maybe 15.
Oh,
But we'd like to have more. We've talked about inviting people specifically so that anyone who comes would know someone, which is an issue for anybody joining us now that we've been in business. As long as we have, it's like coming in the middle of a movie. So we go to lengths to make sure people are welcome.
How many men are in the village?
So we have 135 members right now, and we're 73% women. So someone want to do the math?
20.
40, about 40 men, maybe?
Yeah, I think 36. That's
Something like that, yeah.
That's more than I thought.
You have been involved in welcoming new people, Bonnie. I think I'm looking at her. Just reaching out, and every time a member joins, many of us write emails saying howdy, glad you're with us. for a newcomer who doesn't know anybody, it's tough.
Yeah. Well, we always steal your topics. We get whatever questions or areas you talk about, and we get dull and boring. So we say, well, what are the men talking about? So we steal your list and we use them accordingly.
If you don't know, the Men's Times topics are posted on the blog. So anyone can read them and share them with their family or their, whoever you're talking to. They're very relevant. John Tewitt puts them together. Great.
Well, John Tewitt is responsible for those topics, and so really you look to him as the, he comes up with some wonderful ideas.
Yeah.
And one thing we've never done, and intentionally so, is just small talk. You know, the baseball team, the football team, you know, the thing men usually talk about when there's a cocktail party. You know, women don't have that problem.
Taking a page from the women.
Well, let's give Mike a round of applause and we'll open it up for more discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all to you. You're the ones that make it possible for me to have a happy life.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you, Bea.
Thanks,
Thank
Bea.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
That was
Okay.
great.
Have a great holiday.